Well, I have an older brother, which means when I was a little kid, most of my toys were inherited. And they normally came down to me a bit slobbered on and completely lacking directions. And so where I lacked instruction, I had to make up for it in creativity. And so there were two toys in particular that are in my mind tonight, and I'm going to have to describe them to you. One of them was this yellow piece of plastic that kind of had one big open round end and then a smaller open round end, and was connected in such a way that it looked like a funnel, except that it had big holes running all through it, so it was entirely incapable of funneling. And so for me, in my little world, it became my hat. And I would put it on my head, and it didn't fit fully over the top. I kind of had to wear it on the back because I had what a coach would call in later years a deceptively large head. And so I just kind of wore it on the back, but it was sort of like my crown that I would wear as I sort of ruled over the domain of my toys, and that's how that worked. I also had this little red rubber thing that was kind of just had one open end and then was kind of rounded out at the bottom, and had been sort of accordioned on the side so you could squeeze it, and it was this red rubber squeezy thing. And for me, in my little world, it sort of looked like a beaker. And so for me, it just became my mad science lab. And I took it into the tub, and it made bath time tons of fun. Because I would put different kinds of soap and conditioner and all sorts of things inside, and then I'd be like, I'm making stuff, what is happening? And I'd kind of pour it out, and a little conditioner would come out and be like, it's a lie, all right? And it sort of was tons of fun for me. Now, that's how it continued for a long time, and I need to say this: if at any point in my young life you would have come to me and tried to give me advice as to a different way to see these things or operate with them, I would have said, I'm sorry, excuse me, whose yellow plastic thing is this? Mine? Okay, yeah, then keep your advice. It's a hat, okay? This is my first rodeo. I've been doing this for years. Hat. Wow, all right? Unteachable. And so it wasn't until, and I'm not making this up, it wasn't until college that I was walking into a bank one time, and as I walked in, there was this dad and his little boy, and I guess they were waiting for somebody because they're just sort of playing a game in the foyer of this bank, right? But I walk in, and I see the little kid, and he has one of these yellow plastic deals and one of those red rubber squeezy things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen one of those in years. And then I see it, and the kid grabs it, and he takes the open end of the red rubber squeezy thing, inserts it into the smaller end of the yellow plastic deal, screws them together, thus making it one single toy. And I remember looking at that and going, that's funny, I never thought of that. And then as he held this thing by what was now its neck, I remember he ran up to his dad, and his dad handed him this little ball that he dropped into the open end of the funnel deal, and it was just the right size, that it didn't come out of the slats on the side, but just kind of nestled in where the two pieces met under the singular toy. And so at that moment, I'm like, what on earth? And I'm walking over to see this thing, and I see this kid as he grabs it, and he hits the red rubber squeezy thing in a way that accordions it, that shoots air up into the funnel, thereby sending the ball into the air, at which point he begins to run to try to catch it in the open end. And I remember all of a sudden it landed on me. It's a game. And then I thought, years of my life wasted. Because I didn't see how they fit. Now, why am I telling you that? For this reason. We've been talking about some things the last couple weeks, dropping some concepts on you, talking about why God made everything, that it's for the glory of God, that there is a glorious God and it's all about Him. We've been talking about your mind and what it's for and how it operates. We've been talking about your affections, the desires of your heart, and now as we talk about your life, your decisions and the will, where you go, the reality is we're talking about all these things, but for many of us, we don't see how they all fit. And for me, when I saw this come together, I saw all these separate pieces. When they were aligned, it gave this kid this whole new sense of joy and purpose, right, that I had missed in my childhood. And what I'm hoping is, as we kind of line up these pieces of the glory of God and your mind and your affections and your will, as we begin to put these pieces together where they belong, my hope tonight is it will fill your life with a sense of joy and a sense of purpose maybe you've never known before. And so what we're going to do, and what I'm excited about tonight, is we're going to try to connect all these pieces as we close down this series. And the good news is we're not going to have to run all over our Bible to do that. There's one passage, 3 verses that does it for us, ties up all these pieces we've been talking about, and it's in a prayer. It's wonderful. Paul, the Apostle Paul, includes in all of his letters that he wrote prayers for the people that he's writing to, and they're wonderfully theological, and they're wonderful because they express his heart for his people. And so if you're ever wondering, I don't know what to pray for, read the prayers of Paul. They're deep, and they express a heartfelt passion for people, and so you should look into these. But there's a prayer at the beginning for the Philippians, his beloved people, and he prays a prayer for them that takes all these pieces we've been talking about your affections and your mind and the glory of God and your life and how it all fits, and he ties it all together and shows you how the pieces connect into your purpose. And that's what we're going to look at tonight. And so when we jump in, we're going to dive right in. Verse 9, it says this, and this is my prayer. He says, I'm praying for you, and this is it. And then he delivers the content. He says, my prayer for you, Christian believer, as you enter into this world, this is my prayer for you, that your love may abound more and more. And so as he opens up this letter for them and begins to pray for them, he says, this is what I'm praying. When I think of you guys, my prayer is aimed at your love. He doesn't say, I'm praying for your duties. He doesn't say, I'm praying for you guys, and I'm just praying you get your junk together, all right? And do less of this and a lot more of that. He doesn't talk about duty. And he doesn't talk about their mind, what they're thinking about yet. He says, when I pray about you, what I pray for is your love. I pray for your affections. I pray for the movements of your heart. Now you go, love for who? For God or for people? And the reality is, he doesn't pick a direct object. He picks a broad word, agape, and uses it in a broad way because I think he meant to. I think he's doing what Jesus did when he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He says, the greatest one is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second one is like it, love others as yourself. Jesus couldn't separate them. Well, it starts with love God with everything you have, but you can't do that without it suddenly overflowing the banks into love for people. And so Paul says, I'm just praying for your love to abound more and more. Your love for God that always explodes into a love for people. But he starts, and I think you've got to grab this, he starts by praying for their affections, for their love. And he says, my prayer is that your love would abound more and more. That's his prayer. Malon and malon, that it would keep going, that it would be magnified and increased. He prays for unceasing progress. That there would be no limit to the growth of their love. That's what he's praying, that your love would just continue to increase. And the word abound he puts in the progressive present tense, that it would keep abounding. The word abound means excess and fullness that overflows the set boundaries. He said, I'm praying that your love blows past all boundaries and more. It gets bigger and just overwhelms everything. That's my prayer for you. And that's the Christian life. That's the heartbeat of the Christian life. I love the Westminster Longer Catechism says this, when it's defining sanctification, the Christian life of walking in holiness with God, it says, it is these graces, the graces God puts in your heart, they are stirred up, increased, and strengthened. That's the Christian life. That what God puts in your heart through his Holy Spirit, love, joy, and peace, these fruits of the Spirit, that they grow and increase and get stronger. That's the Christian life. And you see it all through Paul's writings. Here and in 1 Thessalonians, he says, I pray that your love abounds. He uses that word again. In 2 Corinthians 4 and Colossians 2, he says, I pray that your thanksgiving or your gratitude overflows into the glory of God. In Romans 15, he says, I pray that your joy and your hope overflows. He uses the same word. That's his prayer all through the Bible, that your affections for God, your joy in God, your hope in God, your love for God would blow past any boundaries and expand. That's my hope for you, is that your affections for God grows. That's what Jesus prayed. Twice in John 15 and John 16, in his last conversation with his disciples, he tells them in John 15, he's given them a bunch of commands, and then he stops and says, you know why I'm telling you this? I'm telling you these commands so that your joy may be full. And then in John 16, he's telling them how to pray, and he says, I'm telling you to pray like this, because when you pray like this, your joy will be full. And so he tells them the words of God, the prayers to God, all of this is so that your joy will go nuts. That's the Christian life. Is that your affections would explode. And Jonathan Edwards was right. He said that true religion in great part consists of holy affections. That's the Christian life. The Christian life is enjoyment. How many people miss that? How many people, when you bring up the word religion, it just sounds like shackles and chains? That's not the Bible. It is an overflowing joy and hope and love in God. And I love Jonathan Edwards says it. He says, wherever true religion is, there is a vigorous exercise of the inclination and will towards divine objects. You want to see true religion? You see a vigorous inclination of the will towards divine things. You see someone who's passionate. And he says, in no other category is lukewarmness more odious. And I love that. I mean, that's rough when someone calls you odious. And he says, you can be lukewarm about a bunch of things, but there's no place where lukewarmness is more offensive than in the things of God. If there's anything that should get you pumped up, it's him. Which incidentally, Christian brothers and sisters throughout history saw that this is the way to beat sin. This is the way to beat addictions. This is the way to overcome things that you think you'll never overcome. St. Augustine, that great Christian father of the faith, he was an addict to illicit sexual activity, but when he came to know God, he wrote this in his Confessions. He says, how sweet all at once it was for me to be rid of those fruitless joys which I had once feared to lose. He says, you drove them from me, you who are the true sovereign joy. You drove them from me and took their place, you who are sweeter than all pleasure. O Lord, my God, my light, my wealth, and my salvation. He said, there were things I was finding joy from. I was scared to let them go. And what you convinced me of was that you're better. And not only are you better, you're sweeter than all pleasure. And the Puritans used to say that. How do you dislodge a beautiful thing from the human heart? If you love something that's sick and destroying you, how do you dislodge a beautiful thing? Do you know what their answer was? You replace it with a more beautiful thing. You set your heart on Jesus Christ, right? How do you get free from junk and get attached to something beautiful? You trade in Rosalind for Juliet. Right? That's how you do it. That's how you do it. And so that's the Christian life. Augustine said it this way: the whole life of a good Christian is holy desire. Now, some of you may be asking, and some of you did ask me, well, Ben, okay, if the whole Christian life is this passionate, emotional enjoyment of God, what happens if I'm not enjoying him? And some of you, that really panics you of just, what do I do? And that is a concerning thing. What do I do? Well, the reality is this is a broken world and we struggle. But one of the great things is, and I love that Augustine says it, the whole Christian life is holy desire or holy longing. It's wanting God. So you may want him and at times feel filled with joy. You may want him and at times feel like, God, I don't know where you are and I'm struggling. Read the Psalms. That's the Christian life for David, the psalmist. As a deer pants for water, I'm panting for you. Sometimes he was filled and satisfied and said, get these tambourines out. And he'd go nuts. And sometimes he'd just say, I'm thirsty and I need to find you. Will you come to me? And so even if you don't have him, there's a sense of longing. I love, Shane Bernard wrote a song once that I thought was beautiful. It's the heart cry of the psalmist. He just one time when he was struggling, he just wrote, Lord, I miss you. And some of you, maybe that can be the most honest prayer, is I want to enjoy you that way. And that would be a good prayer to say in the midst of a broken world. Because the reality is, the Christian life is in large part holy affections. And so I pray that your love will abound more and more. That's my prayer for you. But if you look at how he goes on, he doesn't say, and I want it to abound more and more, and become you dancing around and dancing with flags and kind of sleeping. Like he doesn't say, I want increased ecstatic behavior. I'm not saying dancing's wrong. I'm not saying flags aren't appropriate. I'm saying that's not what he says. He doesn't say, all I want you to do is go nuts and screaming and crying. And he doesn't say that. I want your love to abound more and more. Not just in those things may come from love, but what he's praying is, I want your love to grow, and look how he wants it to grow. I want it to increase with knowledge. I want it to increase in knowledge. I want your love to have pumped into it knowledge. Why? What does that mean? Well, Paul understands something. Paul understands what our whole Bible declares, and it's this, that knowledge is the fuel for the affections. Your knowledge is your fuel for your affections. Your emotions, they are responses to something you engage with. They respond to content. And so he says, I want your love to fill with knowledge. I want you to interact with content that will stir your affections. That's the only way your affections will get stirred. And so if I just said to you, JJ snow cones, and then I said, love them passionately with all your heart. Some of you wouldn't have a problem with that. Some of you would go, okay, I don't know what they are. And then you'd go, love them passionately. I can't do that. I can't make myself love it. You can't make yourself love anything. You go, how am I supposed to do that? Well, the reality is, you don't have affection stirred for them. You weren't one of the people who whooped for them. Why? Because you probably don't have any experience of them. You don't have any knowledge to base on it. So how can your affections for them be stirred? How can you generate any excitement for them if you don't know anything about them? You got to drive down to Villa Maria, and you got to get some content. You got to go down to that little shack sitting there in the corner of some parking lot, and you got to stand there and watch for a minute at the line that snakes around the parking lot of people from all different professions and walks of life, and you got to pull that in and go, why are people from all tribes and nations gathered at this little shack? And then you got to watch and see all the bees, and you go, even nature is rejoicing in this city. And then you got to watch the guy make him and see that he doesn't just drop some ice into a cup and pour some syrup on it. He gets a little bit of ice and a little bit of syrup and a little bit, and you go, this is far more complex than I ever thought about snow cones. Like, there's a level of intensity in there that I had never understood in this world. And then you got to order one. And then you got to taste one. And then you got to see how that ice is just the right consistency, that it sort of melts on your tongue, and as it does so, it just lays this blanket of wonderful flavor across your entire palate. And you have to experience that and go, Caribbean splash. Where have you been my whole life? And then you go through that moment of, how come no one told me about this before? Do you guys know about this? And they're like, yes, we know about it. We're all here. And you're like, people should know about this. And suddenly as you taste it more, you're like, this is unbelievable. And this response comes because of experience. And then months later, you can be sitting somewhere else, some other place in Texas or in the world, and I could just say, JJ Snow Cones, and your affections go, oh my gosh, let's get in the car. All right, and your affections are stirred. Why? Because now you have content. The psalmist said, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. The Bible didn't say you're supposed to love the Lord, love him right now. And you go, duh. It says, you know what you need to do first? You need to taste and see. You need to come try him. You need to taste and see that he's good. And then worship gets easy. Jesus said it. When he was walking around picking up disciples, he didn't come to me and say, get on your knees. He didn't do that. You know he says all through the beginning of the book of John? They say, hey, where are you staying? He says, come and see. Hey, we heard this guy's, hey, just come and see. That's what he said the whole first, when he's interacting with this guy. 3 times, he said, just come watch. Come see what I'm about. And as they watched him, they believed in him. They wondered at him. They were confused by him. And then they worshiped him. And it was when they saw him and they took in content that their affections began to respond. And that's how it rolls. Knowledge is the fuel for the affections. And so if some of you are so cold to the things of God, and you wonder why, and it's because the flame of your affections for him haven't received a log in years. I read a book on fire a couple years ago, and they were talking about forest fires need 3 things, and they called it the fire triangle. If you want a blazing forest fire, you need the fire triangle, and there's 3 things in the fire triangle. There's wind, there's heat, and there's fuel. Fuel like wood, anything flammable. And it says if you get all 3 of those things in a situation, if you have heat from this flame, and then you introduce into that fuels, those fuels get heated, more heat comes, and if you throw on more fuels, it begins to affect the wind, and the wind makes it spread. And it says, as that happens, as that triangle is stabilized, this thing will just grow and multiply on itself. These things will feed into each other, making a feedback loop, and it will completely explode into a blaze. But what you've got to have is the heat receiving fuel. And then the wind blows, and you got yourself a serious fire. And some of you, the heat of your affections has grown so cold because you don't throw any fuel in. And so the reality is for some of you, you go, I don't understand why I don't just love God. Well, you know what? You need to set your mind's attention on him if you want your heart's affections to be stirred by him. And the Bible understands that. That's why all through it, Paul is calling out to you. Romans 12, he says, be transformed. How, Paul? By the renewing of your mind. That's why he tells the Philippians in Philippians 4, don't be anxious about anything, but everything in prayer, let your requests be made known to God. He says, if you're freaking out about stuff, lay it down before God. But then he doesn't stop there. He says, and if there's anything true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, of good repute, if there's anything excellent or worthy of praise, dwell on those things. He says, the problem with you is you get your mind loaded up with stuff you're freaking out about. Trust God with it and think about the beautiful things, the excellent things, the wonderful things. Fill your mind with that. And he says, then the peace of Christ rules in you. It starts in your mind. Set your mind on things above is what Colossians says. Peter says it twice in 2 Peter. He says, I want to stir you up. How are you going to stir me up, Peter? By way of reminder. As I put thoughts in your mind, as you set your mind on God, it stirs your affections for God. That's how it works. And because this is the first piece, the first connection, what you think about is what you care about. What you think about is what you care about. So however you perceive of the Christian life in this room, it is primarily a battle of the mind. It is a fight to think about the truths of God and to come and stare at them and look at the words of God and study them, look at the world of God and say, I've got to look at these and see you, God, truths about you, things about you. And as I stare into them, I have to believe that you'll begin to stir my affections, that you'll stir my affections. But notice he prays that for them because it's not just fuel into your affections. The wind's got to blow. God has to take it and make it burn. And so that's why you pray, God, will you, as I come near your word, take this fuel and blow, Holy Spirit, over it, and will you make my love abound in this knowledge? It's a miracle. You can read the Bible and get nothing out of it. Or you can come to it and say, oh God, incline my heart to your testimonies and pray that the wind blows. And he begins to stir up in you a heat for him. That's the miracle. I love it. Jonathan Edwards was asked in his ministry, there was a time way back in America that people were starting to get fired up about their spirituality. Young people, particularly college-age people, were getting real emotionally ecstatic about who God was, and it scared the old people. And so some of them said, you kids need to knock it off. And so they asked Jonathan Edwards, because he was the smartest Christian around at the time, hey, will you come talk to these college kids and tell them to dial it down a shade? Because we think all these affections for God are dangerous. And this is what he said. He said, I should think myself in the way of my duty to raise the affections of my hearers as high as I possibly can, provided that they are affected with nothing but truth and with affections that are not disagreeable to the nature of what they're affected with. He says, I want to stir holy affections, affections for God that are rising up because of truth, and affections that are consistent with the truth. That's the Christian life. That as I stare into the words of God, what I think about begins to be what I care about. Does that make sense? When Donna and I were dating, we went through a season where we were in different places during the summer, and we got to a place where we just had to write each other letters. We said, let's just write letters for each other. And there would be days you wake up and you're busy with stuff and you're trying to get things done, and you would forget. You'd forget about each other to some degree, and the heart wouldn't be as warmed. But as we thought about each other, especially in that time where we were heading towards marriage, it was easy to get the affection stirred if I thought about her, and it was easy to get them really stirred if I could read the words she wrote. And I got to tell you, I read them. I was in seminary at the time. I read them like I was exegeting them. You know, I would get a letter from her, and it would say, I miss you. And I would say, I miss you. I is the subject, that is which is doing the word. The I is her. It is Donna. Donna is doing the action of the verb. The verb is miss. Donna misses, miss, and she uses the present tense continuous active. That means she is constantly missing. You, that is me, the direct object, receiving the action of the verb. Donna is missing me, continuously, actively missing me. This is unbelievable. I got to marry this girl. All right, and I would get fired up by interacting with the words. But the words didn't make me love her. Something else miraculous had to happen. It's a miracle. And so for you, you come to the words of God and say, God, stir my affections as I read your word. Stir my affections as I walk through the world. Help me harness everything around me to fill my mind with thoughts of God, to stir my affections of God, because what I think about will be what I care about. What you think about will be what you care about. What do you let your mind dwell on, young people? When you're in your car, when you're laying in bed, what rolls around in your mind? What you think about will be what you love and who you are. Guard your mind and fill it with thoughts of God. And you go, well, Ben, that can't be enough, because isn't the Christian life about doing stuff? Isn't there stuff we're supposed to do in it? All through the Bible, commands to do stuff? Yes. And so he keeps going and he says, I pray that your love would abound more and more in knowledge. And then he continues and says, and all discernment. What is discernment? It means insight into all manner, and he uses all, insight into all manner of practical situations. It could have just as easily, that word, been translated tact. Tact is I see a situation and I respond to it accordingly, that I can see it rightly and respond rightly. He says, so I'm praying that your love would be able to look at the world right. That your love would perceive the practical world right. And then look in verse 10, it says, so that indicates purpose. For this reason, so that you may approve what is excellent. And so be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness. He says, I'm praying your love would get more knowledge of God, because that knowledge will stir affections. And then I'm praying your love would get discerning around the world, so that as it looks around, you may approve. And that word approve, it used to mean just test. That you would test things, like you would test gold to see if it was real, test money. Luke chapter 14 uses that exact same verb to talk about testing oxes, to see if they're good oxes. And so it became this idea of I'm testing something to see if it's any good. I'm checking out this ox to see if it's good. But it became a word that meant I'm testing something and seeing that it is good. And so the word came to mean I'm testing, evaluating something, and then finding it to be something that's good. So approve is a great translation. I want your love to get discerning, so that as you look at the world, you will see stuff, evaluate it, and identify the good things. And you would identify them, it says, so that you would approve what is excellent. I want your love to get discerning, so that when it sees things, it approves of, says that is good, to excellent things, things that excel past other things. He says, I want your love for God to get sharper, that as it looks around, it looks in the world and sees wonderful things, appropriate things, excellent things, and it loves those things. With the purpose, and he goes on, in order that you'll be pure and blameless in the day of Christ, being filled with the fruit of righteousness. I want it to happen so that you'll begin to live a life that you'll be pure and blameless, filled with the fruit of righteousness. That is, you're filled with intrinsic qualities and activities that are right before God, that you'll be engaging in all these activities that you saw were wonderful, and you'll be doing them on the day Christ comes. And so he'll see you, you're engaged in what he loves, you're engaged in him because you love him, and everybody wins. And you go, Ben, that was really fast. Help me unpack that. Well, let me do this. That your love would get discerning of what the beloved likes. And that as you see those, you move towards them. So you do them. And as you do them, when he shows up, ta-da. So Donna, before I met her, had short hair, which is fine. Girls with short hair, it's great. It was also bright blue, which is fine. I don't mind short, bright blue hair at all. But in the world of hair, if I had to choose short, bright blue hair and longer, natural colored hair, I'm probably going to gravitate towards the longer. Right? And so her band, not knowing me, just said, hey, I think the guy that you may date may like it, less colorful and longer. And so she grew it out. And when I saw her, I liked it. And so when we got married, she did what a lot of girls do when they married, and probably 100% of you will do this. As soon as your wedding's over, you cut all your hair off. It's kind of, I don't know what it is, and there's no Bible verse for it. It's just watch. They do. And that was fine, and it looked cute. But then as she grew it out, I realized, hey, when it's longer, I really like it. Now for her, she saw, okay, the man I love likes my hair longer. What am I going to do about that? I'm going to wear it longer. And so when I get it done, and it gets long, and it stays long. And he sees me come back, and there it is, and I've grown it and shaped it, and he sees it. He's going to see it and go, whoa. And I'm going to see it and go, yeah. And we're going to see it and go, and everybody wins. You see what I'm saying? That's what he's talking about. That your love for God gets discerning. You start to realize the thing God loves. And then as you move forward towards those things he loves, it says in the day of Christ, the day Christ comes, you're engaging in things he loves. Why? Because you love him. It's your love that grows in discernment. As you love him, you engage in these things he loves, and it's not a burden, it's joyful. So when he sees you, he sees it and goes, this is great. And you go, I know. So I had a friend when I was in high school. I remember we were at the mall together, and we walked past this candy store, and he was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I was like, what? And he goes, there is a huge bin of Jolly Ranchers. And I'm like, congratulations. I don't care. All right? It wasn't my thing. And he walks in there, and he says, everything stops now. We are going to pick out a bag of only peach Jolly Ranchers. And I'm like, what? And for the next year, I don't know, it was forever, we sat there, and I mean, it was like a mining operation. It wasn't just picking them off top. I mean, it was like we were using, like buckets, and we were sifting, all right, and we were just finding and he was just putting them all in this bag. And it was like 20, 30 minutes, an hour into this, and I'm like, I hate this. I don't want to do this anymore. Why are we doing this? And he says, we're doing it for my girlfriend. And I'm like, I don't care. And so after a while, I was like, why are we doing this? And I remember he looked up at me and he said, because I love her. Because I love her. And so what are you going to say? I'm like, off we go. For me, it was a burden. For him, it was a joy. Why? Because his love got discerning. He watched his girl and realized she liked the peach ones. And so his love grew in discernment of what the beloved likes, and then he ran to do those things so that when the day he saw her, everybody wins. And that's what he's talking about. That when you love God, you fill your mind with knowledge of him, of what he did on the cross, of what he is like, how glorious he is, how great his love that he would give his life for you. You begin to ponder those great things. And as you ponder these, you go, you are unbelievable. And then when you start to see what he loves, this great God who came down and humbled himself to becoming a man and humbled himself to being a servant and to be a servant even to death on a cross. And he did all these things for me, and that he loves me, and that he's caring for me, and that he's bringing me back to God so I can enjoy God and so I can love God and glorify God, that he's doing all this in me. And then you find out that he really loves orphans. You may have never thought about an orphan in some other country. And some people are like, oh, I love orphans, because they want to be seen as someone who loves orphans. And it's about them. But you become a person who says, I am crazy about this God, and he loves these kids. Then guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to love these kids. And so you're loving on these kids, and it's not a burden. You're not like, oh, God makes me or else. It's not that. It's my beloved loves this, and I love him. And as I'm doing this, maybe you'll love the kid. You'll start to like the kid. But even if you never like the kid, if he's mean to you and hits you, you can still enjoy this because you're doing it for love of him. That's how you love your enemies. Jesus says, love your enemies. How can I do that? How can I do that if I derive no value from them? Because you know that he values you loving them. That's what will make you love somebody even while they're murdering you. Even while they're murdering you. The martyrs got that. We need to grab that. I love him. I see what he values, and I chase that because he loves it. And when I see him, I want to be getting ready for him. And all this imagery of the day of Christ, ladies, I won't belabor it, but it's wedding day imagery. You get ready and you get done up so when the day he comes, you're ready. Not because you have to and he's making you and you're like, it's oppressive and this dress, and it's not that. It's not that. You're rejoicing in that, right? You're rejoicing in that moment to be ready for him because you love him. It's not a burden. And that's this picture. Do you see that? And so you go, what's going on here, Ben? What does this mean? This is the next connecting piece. I fill my mind with knowledge of him to stir my heart with affections for him, because it's your affections that determine your actions. It's when your heart's stirred that you move. That's a human being. None of us do anything we don't want to do, really. And you go, well, I do stuff I don't like to do. Think about it. There's some motivation that does it. We always do what we want to do. And so the reality is, I say, I'm going to load my mind with thoughts of God to stir my affections for God. So I'll begin to move towards God, because here it is. What you think about is what you'll care about. And what you care about, you will chase. See it? That's the Christian life. What I think about is what I care about. And what I care about, I will chase. And so the Christian life is loading my mind with thoughts of God in nature, in his word, drawing near to him and saying, I must come near to you and drink from you and eat from you and feast on you and be filled by you. And as I think about you, you fill my affections for you, and then I walk with you to do anything, anywhere. And all of this becomes about you. And it says that this comes through Jesus Christ, these works of righteousness. And I love that he does that, because the reality is you're not doing it for God like you have to bring him something. You're doing it for God, but through God. You'll be filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ. I love that. C.S. Lewis had this wonderful illustration of it. There was a band that named themselves after C.S. Lewis's illustration of this called Sixpence None the Richer. Remember they sang Kiss Me and a bunch of cute songs? Remember those? The lead singer was on David Letterman, and he was hitting on her in kind of a weird, creepy way. And then he was like, your band, Sixpence None the Richer, what does that even mean? And she tells him, it's an illustration from C.S. Lewis. It's about a dad who's got a little boy that wants to buy the dad a present, but he's a little boy, he doesn't have any money. So the dad gives him money, and the kid goes and buys like an ugly tie or something. And he brings it back and says, here's a tie. Well, the dad at that point is sixpence none the richer. He didn't make more money. It was his money that he gave the kid to go buy the gift and bring to him, right? But so you didn't do the dad a favor. But the reality is he enjoyed that you went to do all this. And so he wins, and you win, and everybody wins, but you're not doing him a favor. And that's this. When you go to serve God, you're serving God, but it's not like, oh, I got to do this so God will be happy. You're serving God through the power of God. He gives you the resources. It comes through the agency of Jesus Christ, this love, this joy, this peace. And when I aim it back at him, it's this feedback loop that ultimately, and here's where it ends, glorifies God. Do you see that? You'll be filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. We started this series by saying the chief end of man is to glorify God, that I would see his attributes and praise them. How do I do that? You do it this way. I set my mind's attention on God. And so as my heart's affections are stirred by God, I begin to engage this world in the way he intended and in a way that positions me to enjoy him. And as I do that, he is glorified, I am satisfied, my heart is filled, he is exalted, and he is glorified by me enjoying him. Do you see that? Jonathan Edwards said it this way. God glorifies himself towards the creature in two ways, by appearing to their understanding and in communicating himself to their hearts, and in their rejoicing and delighting in and enjoying him, the manifestation which he makes of himself. God is glorified not only by his glory being seen, but by his glory being rejoiced in. And when those see it and delight in it, God is more glorified than if they only see it. His glory is then received by the whole soul, both by the understanding and by the heart. God made the world that it might communicate and that the creature receive his glory, and that it might be received both by the mind and the heart. And he that testifies his idea of God's glory doesn't glorify God as much as he who testifies also his approbation of it and his delight in it. Or if you want it simpler, he said it in the end for which God created the world. The happiness of the creature consists in rejoicing in God, by which God is also magnified and exalted. How is my wife honored by me? Not just when I pay attention to her, although that's a good start. Write that down, guys. But it's when I pay attention to her, and as I think about her and look at her and engage with her, my affections are stirred for her, and my love for her moves me to talk, engage, and enjoy her. When I enjoy her, she's honored by me. And that's the fullness of what marriage is meant to be. Not just me doing things for her, not just me paying attention to her with my mind, but when I engage her with my mind and my affections are stirred and I move towards her and I enjoy her, she's honored. Last story, I watched special features on a DVD a couple nights ago about J.J. Abrams. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a producer. Do you guys keep tabs with producers? It's okay. J.J. Abrams Did the new Star Trek, did Lost, did Alias, did something else that didn't do as well. Forget it. I can't remember it. He's a gifted guy. And I remember watching this deal, and it was the interesting thing. This camera's just following him around, and it's watching him make this movie. And he's making this movie, and he's working hard at it, and he's doing all this stuff to put this movie together. And what was the point of him putting the movie together? The point of him putting it all together was so that I would sit in a seat and watch it. And then as I watched it, not just watch it and went, that was indeed a movie. There were characters, and they did actions. Fair enough. And then leave. It's that I would watch it and enjoy it. And what was interesting is to watch him, and as he's talking with the camera and they're asking him questions, you can see the whole reason why he's doing it, what's driving him when he talks to the camera, what's driving him when he does this, is that his hope is that what he is putting out there, you will go watch. And not just watch, but like. And you can see that what he is excited about is that you would watch it and like it, because that's when he wins. He doesn't want to just make it and then doesn't care what you do. And he's not going to have you enjoy it and then just go, what are you out? You're just enjoying movies? I worked hard. It's like, what? No, he wants you to go and take it in, enjoy it, praise it. And when you do that, he wins. He wins. He's glorified. He's honored. You're satisfied. You enjoyed it. And everybody wins. And that's the Christian life. That's the human life. That I see that there is a glorious God who made all things that reflect and shine his glory. I see the tragedy that we exchange the glory of God for lesser things. We all did. But then I see the beauty of the fact that God didn't just send us off to hell. He sent his son into the human story, who was full of grace and full of truth, and loved us and cared for us and died to take all our sin out of the way and rose victorious from the grave and said, you get to come with me and enjoy my Father and be what you're made to be. That you would enjoy me and have everlasting life. That you would have eternal life, and that is to know me. That your joy would be full. And that as we come to him, not just with knowledge of him, but we see him and enjoy him and appreciate him as the satisfier of our souls. When we think about him and are filled with affections for him, we will praise him. And he'll be glorified. We'll be satisfied. And we will do exactly what we were made to do. And that's the human story. And I pray it's your story.